Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts or story in the comments, and subscribe to our stories. Before I get started, tell me where you're watching from. I'm curious to see which cities and towns will join me in this memoir. In the biting dawn of January 1945, the snow lay thick and unbroken across the open plains of Poland. The wind carved its way through the trees like a restless spirit, whispering the stories of countless battles fought and lost in the frozen fields. It was here, in this harsh winter, that a young German tank crew found themselves caught between the certainty of surrender and the defiance of duty. He was just 19, barely more than a boy, when he first climbed into the cramped metal hull of the Panther tank. His name was Karl, and though he had grown up with the stories of honor and loyalty to the fatherland, nothing in his life had prepared him for the icy terror of the Eastern Front. The metal around him groaned as the engine started, and the smell of oil and gunpowder filled his nostrils. The world outside was a white wasteland, punctuated only by the distant sound of artillery, like the drumbeats of some ancient, unyielding army. Karl's crew had been on the move for days, retreating through shattered villages and bombed-out roads, always aware that behind them, the Red Army pressed relentlessly forward. His commander, a stern and wiry man named Friedrich, had never raised his voice in anger, but the tension in his eyes spoke volumes. Friedrich knew, as did all of them, that surrender could mean death, imprisonment, or worse. But the thought of giving up their machine, their Panther, their home, and their shield was something none of them could bear. The first encounter came suddenly, like a thunderclap. Through the blinding snow, Karl glimpsed the glint of steel, Soviet T-34s moving in a calculated formation, their engine slicing through the quiet. His heart pounded in rhythm with the engine's hum, and for a brief moment, he thought of home, the small village near the Rhine, the scent of his mother's bread baking, the laughter of his younger siblings. But all of that seemed impossibly distant now. There was only the tank, the crew, and the cold, merciless battlefield. Friedrich barked the orders with precision, his voice cutting through the roar of the engines. Karl manned his position, gripping the turret controls with frozen fingers, sweat running down his temple despite the chill. Every movement was rehearsed, honed by weeks of relentless training and the harsh demands of war. They fired, shells whistling through the air, tearing into the snow and ice, but for every TV-34 they disabled, two more seemed to appear, emerging from the white haze like ghosts. Hours passed in a blur of noise and fear, punctuated by moments of horrifying clarity, the sight of a crew member, thrown from his tank, lying motionless in the snow, the distant echo of artillery tearing through the trees, the sharp, metallic smell of scorched steel and smoke. Karl's mind raced, not with strategy, but with survival. Every glance at Friedrich revealed the same hard truth: they would not surrender, not now, not ever. There was a stubborn pride, a refusal to let their machine be captured, even as exhaustion gnawed at their bodies and the bitter cold crept into their bones. By mid-afternoon, the battle had slowed to a tense stalemate. The snow had turned red in places, and the once pristine landscape seemed to weep for the young men who had been swallowed by it. Karl could see the fear in his crewmates' eyes, mirrored in his own reflection in the metal walls of the tank. And yet, in that fear, there was a strange, resolute calm. They were bound together, not just by duty, but by the intimate, shared knowledge that each could rely on the other to keep fighting, to keep surviving, no matter how hopeless it seemed. As the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the frozen fields, Friedrich gathered the crew inside the small, steel compartment. He spoke quietly, his voice almost drowned by the whine of the engines, yet each word carried the weight of a lifetime of choices. He reminded them of their purpose, not of glory, not of victory, but of the honor in perseverance. To surrender would be easy. To continue, against all odds, would be remembered, perhaps not by the world, but by themselves. And in that, there was a measure of dignity, fragile but unbroken. Karl pressed his face against the cold metal, staring out at the horizon where the silhouettes of enemy tanks loomed like dark shadows against the fading light. He felt the weight of history pressing down, a heavy mantle that seemed almost impossible to bear. And yet, beneath that weight, there was a fierce spark of defiance, a refusal to yield. This was more than a battle for survival. It was a testament to the human spirit, even in the face of overwhelming odds, even in the cruelest, most unrelenting winter. The first day of their stand ended with the quiet hum of the Panther's engine, the crew battered, weary, yet unbroken. The snow fell softly, almost reverently, covering the scarred ground and hiding the marks of struggle. Karl sat silently, his thoughts a jumble of fear, determination, and fleeting memories of a life far removed from this frozen hell. Outside, the night settled in, vast and indifferent, while inside, the young man and his comrades clung to the only thing left, each other, their panther, and the stubborn refusal to surrender. The night was a living thing, wrapping the frozen fields in darkness so complete it felt like swallowing. Inside the Panther, the crew huddled close to the engine's faint warmth, each man lost in his own thoughts, each heart beating to the rhythm of a world on edge. Karl could hear the faint whisper of snow against metal, like a soft sigh in the chaos, and yet he felt no peace. Every shadow outside seemed to carry a threat, every distant sound, a harbinger of death. Friedrich remained calm, his hand steady on the maps and instruments, eye scanning the horizon through the periscope. "Rest if you can," he said softly, almost like a father speaking to sons far too young for this war. "But do not forget, we are still in the storm. One false move, one hesitation, and it will be the end for all of us." Karl nodded, though the words brought little comfort. His fingers ached from the controls, and his body throbbed from the constant tension. Yet he could not close his eyes. Sleep was a luxury for those who had survived the battle, not for those still in its grasp. Around him, the crew whispered in hushed tones, sharing memories, jokes, small fragments of normal life, as if speaking them aloud could tether them to something human, something real, beyond the steel and gunfire. By early morning, the Soviet advance resumed with relentless precision. The T-34s emerged from the mist like phantoms, their engines growling, treads grinding the frozen earth. Karl felt his stomach tighten as Friedrich barked orders, each command a lifeline thrown into a storm of chaos. They maneuvered through the snow, firing carefully, conserving shells, each shot a desperate prayer. The battlefield became a frozen chessboard, tanks moving with strategic intent, each decision weighted by lives, each hesitation punished brutally. A shell struck nearby, shaking the Panther violently. Karl gritted his teeth, feeling the vibration through his bones. Frost coated the inside of the hatch, forming tiny crystals that caught the pale light. The smell of oil, gunpowder, and sweat hung heavy, a reminder of their fragile mortality. Karl's mind raced. He thought of home again, of his father's workshop and the smell of sawdust, of his mother humming in the kitchen. These fleeting images clashed violently with the carnage around him. He was living two lives at once, one in memory, one in the unforgiving present. Hours dragged on, yet minutes felt like years. The crew fought as one, moving through the snow with mechanical precision. Friedrich's calm authority was a beacon, his decisions crisp, unyielding, even as exhaustion threatened to unravel them. Karl felt a strange clarity in the chaos, a raw awareness that life and death were balanced on the edge of a blade. And somewhere, beneath the fear, a stubborn pride bloomed. They were alive. They had survived. And they would not surrender, not to the cold, not to the enemy, not to fate itself. Then came the moment that would mark them forever. A column of Soviet tanks had taken position on higher ground, cutting off any hope of retreat. The Panther was now surrounded, the icy wind carrying the distant roar of artillery and the whistle of incoming shells. Karl's hand shook on the controls, not from cold but from the terrifying beauty of the moment, the terrible clarity of being alive while the world seemed to collapse around him. Friedrich leaned close, his voice low but unwavering. "We make our stand here," he said. "We fight as long as we can. Not because we expect victory, but because we must." Karl felt the weight of those words sink in. Victory was no longer a promise, survival was measured in minutes, in the courage to continue, in the refusal to bow. They fired again, their shells cutting into the snow and steel, each impact a defiance, each maneuver a statement. We exist, we resist, we endure. Time became a blur. Karl could no longer distinguish between night and day, snow and smoke, the cries of men from the wind. All that remained was the unity of the crew, the thrum of the engine beneath them, the metal hull that was both prison and protector. He glanced at Friedrich, saw the same tired determination mirrored in every line of his face. And in that glance, Karl understood the true weight of courage, not heroics or glory, but the choice to persist, to protect, to hold the line even when the world demanded surrender. As the hours passed, a strange quiet settled over the battlefield. The Soviets, surprised by the tenacity of the Panther crew, paused, regrouped, uncertain of the strength that refused to bend. Karl realized then that their stand had meaning beyond survival. It was a testament to the human spirit. The tank, battered and frozen, had become more than a machine. It was a symbol, a statement that even in the darkest winter, in the heart of despair, courage could endure. And in that quiet, Karl allowed himself a fleeting thought, that one day, someone would tell their story. That people would remember not just the battle, but the hearts that refused to yield, the young men who clung to duty and honor, the stubborn, beautiful defiance of those who fought not for victory, but for dignity. The snow fell again, soft and relentless, covering the scars of battle, but beneath it, the Panther and its crew waited, unbroken, poised for the next challenge, living proof that even in the harshest winter, the human spirit could not be extinguished. The morning light broke through the snow-laden sky in pale, grey streaks, casting long shadows across the frozen battlefield. Karl's hands ached from hours at the turret controls, his fingers stiff from cold and fatigue, yet he could not let go. Every muscle, every thought, every heartbeat was consumed by the need to survive, to fight, to protect the men who had become his family in steel. Around him, the Panther groaned, the engine trembling under the weight of their resolve, echoing the unspoken tension in the cramped metal hull. The Soviet forces had circled them completely now, a vast, creeping tide of steel and determination. From the turret, Karl could see their glinting forms in the distance, T-34s emerging from the fog, tank crews moving with precise coordination, artillery shells carving the snow into ragged scars. The world beyond their Panther seemed unreal, an endless expanse of white, punctuated by smoke and steel, a landscape that both terrified and fascinated him. He realized, in a sharp, almost painful moment, that he had never felt more alive. Friedrich's voice cut through the hum of the engine. Calm, steady, authoritative. We hold here. No retreat. No surrender. Every shot counts. Every decision counts. Understand? Yes, sir, Karl replied, though his voice was barely a whisper, swallowed by the roar of engines and the biting wind. He glanced at his comrades. They were exhausted, frozen, yet their eyes burned with the same unyielding determination he felt in his own chest. In that moment, Karl understood that courage was not the absence of fear, but the choice to act despite it. The battle resumed with sudden, brutal intensity. Soviet shells pounded the frozen earth, sending sprays of snow and ice into the air. Karl fired with precision, each shot a calculated act of defiance. He watched as one T-34 staggered, wheels torn and turret smoking, before another slid into view, relentless as fate itself. The world outside was chaos incarnate, a symphony of fire and steel, yet inside the Panther, the crew moved with practiced synchronicity, a single organism bound by trust and necessity. Then came the moment that would etch itself into Karl's memory forever. A shell struck near the Panther's left track, sending the vehicle skidding into a snowdrift. The metal groaned under the impact, and for a brief, terrifying instant, Karl feared they were finished. His heart thumped violently, a drumbeat of fear and adrenaline. But Friedrich's hands were already on the controls, steady, precise. Hold it together. We move, we fight, we survive. Karl gritted his teeth and followed orders, the machine shuddering beneath them as they maneuvered through the snow. Every movement was critical, one mistake could mean destruction. And yet, amidst the chaos, a strange clarity emerged. Karl could see patterns in the enemy's movements, anticipate their attacks, and for the first time, he felt a measure of control in a situation that had seemed utterly impossible. Hours passed in a relentless blur. The snow, now tinged with grey and red, seemed to absorb the sounds of battle, muffling them as if the earth itself were holding its breath. Karl's mind oscillated between moments of instinct and reflection. He thought of his parents, of home, of the life that might have been waiting for him if the war had not swept him into this frozen nightmare. And yet, he felt no regret. Not yet. Only the fierce, burning need to survive alongside the men who had become more than comrades. They were brothers. The Soviets pressed harder, flanking the Panther from every side, but Friedrich remained calm, issuing orders with unwavering authority. We do not surrender. Not now. Not ever. Karl could hear the conviction in his voice, feel it in the tremor of the metal beneath them. And in that voice, Karl found his own courage reaffirmed. They were small against the vast enemy, fragile against the steel and snow, yet they refused to yield. That refusal became their armor, stronger than any metal plating. As afternoon bled into evening, the battle reached a fever pitch. Shells exploded around them with terrifying regularity, but the Panther, battered and scarred, moved with a deadly grace. Karl's vision narrowed, his focus sharpened, each shot finding its mark, each maneuver a defiance of fate itself. He could feel the exhaustion clawing at him, the cold gnawing at his bones, but there was no time to dwell on weakness. Survival demanded action, clarity, and the courage to continue when every instinct screamed to surrender, and then, a moment of surreal stillness. Both sides paused, as if the frozen world itself had called for a temporary ceasefire. Karl peered through the periscope, seeing the enemy tanks, their crews weary, cautious, perhaps realizing the stubborn defiance of this small Panther crew. For a brief, fleeting instant, the world seemed suspended, a fragile bubble of quiet amidst the storm. Karl felt an odd mix of exhaustion, relief, and grim satisfaction. They had survived another day. They had held their ground, not because victory was certain, but because they refused to give in. As night fell, the snow glimmered in the faint light of a frozen moon. Karl sat back against the metal hull, listening to the steady hum of the engine and the distant echoes of artillery. He realized that their stand was more than a battle, it was a testament, a story of resilience that would outlive the war, outlast the winter, outshine the fear. In that moment, he understood the weight of courage, the value of loyalty, and the enduring power of human spirit. Even in the most brutal of circumstances, the Panther lay still in the snow, battered but unbroken. Karl and his comrades, weary and frostbitten, had endured the impossible. And as he gazed at the horizon, Karl knew one thing with absolute clarity: no matter what tomorrow might bring, they had proven that even in the heart of despair, defiance, courage, and honor could endure. The following morning arrived with an eerie stillness, broken only by the occasional groan of metal and the whisper of the cold wind across the frozen plains. Karl emerged from the hatch of the Panther, his face numb from frost, eyes scanning the landscape with a mixture of exhaustion and vigilance. The battle had left the snow scarred and ragged, littered with twisted metal and the ghostly outlines of tanks that would never move again. Yet, amid the ruin, the Panther remained upright, defiant, a monument to resilience in a world that seemed determined to destroy everything. Friedrich gathered the crew once more, his expression solemn but unwavering. "We have made our stand," he said quietly. "No one will remember every shell fired, every maneuver, every second we survived. But we will remember. That is enough." Karl felt a lump rise in his throat. He had never truly understood the weight of those words until now, the idea that courage was not always recorded in history books, but etched into memory, into the hearts of those who lived it. The day dragged on with tense quiet. From a distance, Karl could see the Soviets regrouping, their movements cautious, as if the stubborn defiance of the Panther crew had earned a measure of respect, or at least hesitation. Inside the tank, the crew shared silent glances, communicating through gestures and small, almost imperceptible nods. They were alive, yes, but each man bore the invisible scars of the battle, the fear, the cold, the knowledge that death had brushed past them countless times. Yet, there was pride, too, a fierce, unspoken bond that could never be broken. Karl's thoughts drifted back to home, to the village near the Rhine, to his mother's gentle hands and the smell of bread rising from the oven. He wondered if they would ever know the depth of what he had endured, if anyone could understand the strange, terrible beauty of the moments when life and death hung in a fragile balance. Yet he also understood that these experiences, raw and unfiltered, were theirs alone, a secret testament to the human spirit. By late afternoon, the sun cast long, golden shadows over the snow, giving the frozen battlefield a strange, almost surreal beauty. Karl helped Friedrich check the Panther's systems, repairing what could be repaired with trembling fingers and limited resources. Every move was deliberate, every adjustment a silent vow to survive a little longer, to honor the lives of the men who had fallen and the machine that had carried them through so much. As the day faded into a cold, starless night, Karl climbed once more into the turret, peering out at the horizon. The enemy had withdrawn slightly, leaving the Panther standing alone amid the scars of combat. He felt an odd mixture of relief and melancholy. The battle was not over, not for the war, not for the world, but this chapter of survival had been written. And it had been written in courage, endurance, and the stubborn refusal to surrender. Friedrich spoke softly beside him, almost to himself. History will not remember us, Karl. But we will remember each other. And that is enough. Karl nodded, understanding fully for the first time that survival was not merely about living, it was about holding on to the humanity that war sought to strip away. It was about honor, loyalty, and the quiet dignity of choosing to stand, even when the world demanded surrender. In the days that followed, the Panther and its crew continued their retreat across the snowbound plains, battered and weary, yet unbroken. Each day was a test, each movement a delicate balance between fear and courage. And with each passing mile, Karl felt the weight of history pressing closer, a reminder that their actions, though small in the grand sweep of war, carried significance beyond the battlefield. They had become symbols, not of conquest, but of resilience, of the enduring power of the human spirit against insurmountable odds. As Karl looked out at the horizon, the snow reflecting the last glimmers of fading light, he felt a profound sense of gratitude for life, for comradeship, and for the chance to endure. He knew the war would continue, and that many would not survive it. But for this small Panther crew, in this fleeting, frozen moment of history, they had done something remarkable. They had refused to surrender. And that refusal, that act of courage, would echo far longer than any victory or defeat, carried forward not on the pages of history, but in the hearts of those who understood what it truly meant to endure. The Panther rumbled onward, cutting through the snow, carrying its crew into uncertainty, into the next challenge, into the unknown. And Karl, young yet profoundly changed, understood something that would stay with him for the rest of his life. Courage is not measured in triumph, but in the unwavering choice to face the storm and never give up, even when all seems lost. The snow fell silently around them, covering the battlefield in quiet, reflective beauty. And in that silence, Karl knew that they had won something far more lasting than any engagement could offer. They had won the right to remember, to honor, and to endure.